back to the show. I am here with Christian Taylor.
Hey, everybody. Hi, Phil.
Hi, that's yellow.
I was waiting for you to say that.
And green.
It's very confusing. I was going to see
yellow.
what color you said this was.
It's almost tie-dyed.
It is.
Did you tie-dye that?
I did not.
From a summer camp that your kids went to?
No, but it could be.
Okay. And Sky Jitani.
Hi.
You're very blue today.
I'm like blue.
You seem somehow less talkative than Christian.
Amazing.
Are you okay? Is everything okay?
Yeah, I'm fine.
Is there anything we need to talk about?
I just had a large lunch.
There are times when you do have this little edge to you and you are more talkative than I am.
Yeah.
It's not today, but
How do you know? We've barely gotten started.
good point.
We certainly have not
Depends on
gotten
the topic,
started.
doesn't it?
We're certainly not started yet. I had a request to do the theme song as Bob the Tomato. And the request actually was, have you ever done it as Bob the Tomato? And surely I've done it as Bob.
Several times.
More than once, but we'll do it anyway. Hey, it's a podcast. So what do you know? What are the words? How does the song go? Hey, it's a podcast. What do you know? Hey, it's a podcast. And we got video. Hey, it's a podcast. So lend an ear. The Phil Vischer podcast starts right here. We'll talk to Sky
Hi, Bob.
and Christian too.
Hi, boys and girls.
And we've got a guest here. He's sitting right over there, here just for you. Oh, yeah. Hey, it's a podcast, so lend an ear. The Phil Vischer podcast starts right here. The Phil Vischer podcast starts right here.
I think
almost hit it.
I think you need to end it with, and God loves you very much.
Trademark, big idea.
What was that line?
Remember,
actually?
kids, God made you special, and he loves you very much. Goodbye.
Oh, yeah, that's
But
it.
now you have to pitch shift my voice 2 half steps for it to be truly Bob.
Why?
Bob. All the veggie characters are pitch shifted except Mr. Nezer and now it's time for Silly Songs with Larry, the part of the show where Larry comes out and sings a silly song. Those are the only 2 voices.
They're all pitch shifted.
They're all pitch shifted.
That's
Try
so
saying
interesting.
that 10 times real fast.
pitch shifted.
Be careful.
Pitch shifted. Transgender. Pitch shifted. That's a form of pitch shifting, isn't it?
Let's don't
I'm
go
not
there.
transgender. I'm just pitch shifted.
We talked for the last couple of weeks. We've talked about. We have a guest today. Actually, guest John Dixon is here, all the way from Australia. He canoed over and just got here. Canoed through the St. Lawrence Seaway and down Lake Michigan.
That's the wrong direction.
No, he went all the way around the other way. It was incredible.
Wow.
That sounds like Elf. How he went
Yeah.
through 7 levels of the candy cane forest and then through the Lincoln Tunnel to
Right.
get to New York from the North Pole.
So he will be on in just a second. We got some interesting mail from last week. Trinity Western University, of course, we're talking about them in Canada and how the Ontario law, whatever, doesn't want them to be able to make law students because they would be Christian and potentially
Be biased.
anti-gay. And so we got an email from Curtis who says, I'm a pastor in Edmonton, Alberta. Love the podcast. I've been listening for a few months. I've been following your discussion about Trinity Western eagerly and thought you might like a little more background, which broadens the discussion. My wife is an alumnus of TWU, is a trained teacher. When she was attending there, 2001, she graduated. TWU was in the midst of another lawsuit. This time it was their teacher certification program, which was being contended. The British Columbia Teachers Federation took TWU to court, arguing that their community standards, the pledge, would prevent them from being able to train teachers without a discriminatory attitude toward the LGBT students. It went all the way to the Supreme Court, costing TWU a fortune, he says parenthetically, and the final ruling came down in favor of TWU. So now they have a full-blown teacher certification program, and grads no longer have to go to Simon Fraser University to be deprogrammed for a 5th year, like his wife did. So there's a precedent for another certification program, which, thank you, Curtis, in Edmonton, Alberta. That was interesting.
That is very
So
interesting.
he's thinking if it goes all the way to the Supreme Court,
There's precedent that they would
there's
win.
precedent that it would come out the same way.
But the difference is one was for training teachers, the other is for licensing attorneys. And the legal...
Well, licensing teachers.
Right, but licensing attorneys, as your
Yeah.
brother stated in his response, they are the gatekeepers to the law.
Yes,
And
there is
since,
that.
since the legalization...
But teachers are the gatekeepers
To knowledge. Oh, Jinx, you owe me a Coke.
Whatever.
Okay. I thought that was kind of interesting. Got some more feedback. Several people sent me a story because we were talking about sexual assault on college campuses and how I maintain it's much less of an issue on Christian college campuses. And several people said, how do you know? And I said, I strongly suspect. But there was an article about Bob Jones University just in the last week, brought to us by, guess who broke this story about Bob Jones University?
Anthony?
Al Jazeera.
Oh, Al Jazeera.
Al Jazeera America.
Yeah.
I've done stuff with them before.
I remember this
What kind of
discussion.
stuff?
I was on their TV or something.
Yeah, you were.
Okay.
You had a discussion with another Christian person
I-
with a crazy uncle.
Well, there were 4 of us from across the spectrum.
Right.
But this may sound crazy, but I think Al Jazeera, at least my brief engagement with them, probably does a better job on covering the waterfront on some of these issues than Fox, MSNBC, or CNN does.
Don't they have an axe to grind? Don't they have a bone to pick? Don't they have a turban to unwrap?
Phil,
That's just not right.
No, that's terrible.
we don't support you there.
I'm sorry.
Well, I don't know. I'm
Don't
just,
they have an agenda?
Well, I'm sure because
Doesn't
the other
everyone have
cable
an agenda?
networks really don't.
Yeah.
I'm saying it.
None of our cable networks have
right.
Okay.
any bias at all.
Anyway, the story about Bob Jones University was, and it was kind of presented as evidence for there's trouble with sexual assault on Christian college campuses too. What's interesting is the issue with Bob Jones University isn't really about sexual assault on campus. It's about how they have counseled victims of sexual assault. And in 2 of the 3 cases discussed in the article, the sexual assaults happened before people became students. So they were girls that were
So
assaulted
it's not
in high
germane
school.
to our argument.
It wasn't entirely. Wow, where'd you get that?
An SAT
It's,
word.
it's not
Isn't
entirely.
that one of the Jackson 5?
That's germane.
he is germane to our
He's
discussion.
not germane to our conversation.
So, and I don't want necessarily to come to the defense of Bob Jones University, which, as we know, until not terribly long ago, you were not allowed to date across racial borders.
or dance.
Well, you couldn't dance at Wheaton College until 2
True.
years ago. But interracial dating was banned at Bob Jones University, which led to one of my favorite songs, Color Code by Steve Taylor in 1984.
I remember that.
Yeah, we don't need no color code. We don't need no color code. Take your rules and hit the road. We don't need no color code. And the third verse, which was down in Carolina way, lived a man named Big BJ. BJ went and got a school founded on Caucasian rule. Bumper sticker on his Ford says honkies if you love the Lord.
He was a man ahead of his time.
That was way back in 1984.
I can't believe you can remember
I have
that.
a friend who went to Bob Jones during the no interracial dating thing.
Yeah.
And he's biracial. So
who can he date?
Well, this was interesting. He and his brother were both there. I don't want to give away details, but he and his brother were both there. One of them happened to
You
look...
just did give
Well,
away
just hold on,
details.
hold on.
He and his brother were there. That's a detail.
One of them looked more Caucasian, and one of them looked
Okay.
more like a minority. And so they were both dating white girls. But only the brother who looked more minority was called in and disciplined for dating a white girl, and his brother wasn't, even though they're both biracial. And he
That
finally
is-
says what
that
you
is-
just asked: who am I supposed to date? Well, and
Right.
that's what the policy just.
Who am I
super
supposed to
ridiculous.
date? We ask ourselves that every day.
I don't.
Oh, okay.
Not me.
So take the point that yes, there are issues with. In particular, in the case of Bob Jones University, it was how they counseled victims of sexual abuse, and there was kind of some funky, more radical fundamentalist Christian counseling approach. And I agree. That's if I knew someone who was a victim of sexual assault, I would not necessarily send them to Bob Jones University for therapy. Okay. Having said that, there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of sexual assault on the campus of Bob Jones University because we don't have examples
That's
of that.
reported.
That's reported.
But what you're saying is, not that there isn't any at Christian
don't know.
colleges,
I'm not
but
saying that.
it's statistically much less than you would
Just-
find at secular
Yes,
universities.
that's what I'm saying.
Right.
Particularly when you consider that 3/4 of all the sexual assaults on college campuses involve alcohol, and you can't drink on Christian college campuses. So,
Yet.
Supposedly.
no, that'll never happen. When that happens, Jesus is coming back,
Well, it
and
still
boys are going to be
happens.
mad.
It
Yeah.
still
No,
happens.
Have you not
don't.
read with?
Yes. Have you not read
He's
with?
probably not read with.
He probably hasn't.
I did. I read with.
When?
Read with what? I read with.
There's a story in
yeah.
there about.
I know.
drinking
There is
and-
drink, but you're not supposed to, and if you get caught, you're kicked out.
Not necessarily.
Not kicked out.
You're
You
kicked. If you get
You
caught,
may be
you're
kicked. Kicked. Yes, that's
First time
probably
you're
true.
kicked, the
And
second time you're
then,
kicked out.
as if that isn't fun enough, we talked about transgenderism last week.
We did. Quite an interesting
an ism?
discussion.
Transgenderology. We talked about transgenderology last week, and I made the comment that after all, we all start out as female, and then things make you turn male in development. And I got some feedback on that.
I got a little science lesson here.
Yeah.
Which,
So,
by the way, I just want to say thank you. Who was the gentleman that told you that? Do you know his name?
well, Solomon first. Solomon jumped in and said one more thing after he had said something else. The idea that all babies start out as female is a myth. All babies start out as visibly undifferentiated. Some of us still are. The myth comes from the fact that this undifferentiated fetus does not have visible genitalia. And can I say genitalia on the Phil Vischer podcast?
You just did.
Can I say it twice?
You did.
And something without obvious visible looks like a girl. Virtually all babies are genetically male or female from conception. They do not start out as female, and then some of them become male. That is a myth. And then Joanna jumped in. And I have a feeling Joanna is a doctor or a nurse or something, because Joanna says, okay, just to clarify the biology here, in mammals, being female is the default sex. If a child has an X chromosome and no other sex chromosome, they will develop as a female, which is called Turner's syndrome. And a child who is XY, genetically male, who cannot sense testosterone properly, will appear female, but have undescended This is called androgen. I'm trying not to offend any children in the audience. Are there any children in the audience? Stop
Go right
listening.
ahead.
Okay. This is actually has a name. It's called androgen insensitivity. And she says it's on every single medical drama on TV. Babies are always one gender or the other genetically, but essentially the gender pipeline will end up at female unless the gene testes determining factor, TDF, on the Y chromosome is present and functioning correctly. Every baby begins developing on the female track. And did you remember the female track in high school? Do you ever try to jog on the female track? Because they kick you right out. Every baby begins developing on the female track and then either continues on and becomes female or based on TDF. That's my new favorite gene.
You like saying that? You like saying that?
And a testosterone uptick gets off of that track and becomes male. You go to the male track.
So you jump the female track.
And then they make fun of you because you started out on the female track. You know, the males beat you up. Oddly, research done in mice to insert TDF in other parts of the genome shows that TDF is really what makes a mammal male. XX mice with TDF on another chromosome develop as male, though they are genetically female, but are sterile.
So they're transgender mice.
So confusing. I really appreciated that, though.
I know.
Because
Thanks, Joanna.
Honestly, I would have never known it was that complex. You know, I think
Right.
we break things down very
It's
simply.
not black and white.
It isn't.
You know, you think that gender is like a light switch, one or the other, but it's not.
Well, that's what we were trying to convey to Christian last week, and the Southern Baptists, who both deny that.
I'm mostly male.
You do have a more feminine side, I will attest.
Thanks.
But you know, honestly, I think this was awesome for me to read because I do think yes, I did grow up as a Southern Baptist in the South, and there's a lot of things we don't learn down there.
Is there gender clarity in
And
Mississippi?
let me just say, for those of you who feel like we bash Southerners, I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that. I am just saying
She's not.
that I did grow up in sort of a very closed system, I guess, and I didn't learn a lot of those things.
The only reason I mentioned Southern Baptists is they voted, was it a week or two ago?
Right.
Yeah.
Just to say that gender is determined by one's physical
Period. End of story.
equipment.
Right.
So unfortunately, they did take more of a light switch approach.
Right.
Which there's more. So we're discovering there's more gray area in biology, in physiology, than maybe we're comfortable with.
And it's really real. It's scientifically
it does
real.
manifest itself in how people, what they think about themselves, how they feel, and we can't just whack people with a bat and say, sorry, your switch is this way, so knock it off.
You know, there is a genetic and embryonic research can back this up, that all humans actually start out as jerks. Seriously. So
Yes, that's true.
when cells are multiplying initially after fertilization, they form like a ball. I forget what it's called, but it's a ball-shaped
Yeah.
thing of cells.
Yeah, cell ball.
And then one end starts
called a cell ball.
One end starts moving inward to create what ultimately becomes the digestive system between one end and the other. And that initial...
So the guy who leads the charge is called Mr. Anus.
Well, it is. We all start out as just an anus.
I am so shocked right now at this moment. I don't even know what to say. I didn't even know you were allowed to say that on our podcast.
Well, you did.
All right. Well, that's our news for the week.
No, I have one other thing I'd like to talk about.
What do you got?
So there was a woman that sort of backed me up on
the modesty thing.
On the modesty thing. Right.
Yes.
And I appreciated that because I did want to also clarify. I wasn't saying that just Christians ought to be modest based on Christian morality. I think it is a wise thing that we, females in this culture realize that we, carry a very powerful thing. And I just think it is more wise and considerate if we as a culture would realize, we respect ourselves, I think, by being more modest. And
I'm with you.
Yeah.
I'm with you.
So I'm probably going to get beaten up for that one too. But
take that. Okay.
Anyway.
We have on our show today John Dickson, all the way from Australia, via how did he get here?
The candy cane forest.
He knows one of those pedal water bikes. You know those water bikes that you with the big
paddle boat.
Paddle boat.
No.
Oh, the bike, the tricycle.
Oh, with the big wheels.
He did that. He did that all the way here.
Boy, you're amazing, John.
With some flotsam and jetsam. You should see the size of his thighs.
You must have strong legs. Yeah.
His thighs are like big Aussie thighs. That's my new exercise program. It's called Aussie Thighs. Okay, we'll be right back with John Dixon. We're here with John Dixon. John Dixon began his career as a singer-songwriter for the Aussie rock band In the Silence. Is that the name of the...
Yeah, but we were not very.
You were not very silent? Okay, because in silence and rock, I don't think of them as going together. What was the philosophical meaning behind the name?
Well, we invented one after we came up with this cool title.
Oh, okay.
We thought, let's think about it. And because a bunch of us in the band were Christians, though we didn't really see ourselves as a Christian band, we thought maybe it's like the silence before the storm, the period before the coming of Jesus.
So it was eschatological.
Eschatological, and our first album was called Things to Come. So it all sort of tied in.
Yeah,
but I think we just made it up post factum.
Yeah, well, we do that a lot in the church.
Yeah.
With an honors degree in theology and a PhD in ancient history, John is also a senior research fellow at the Department of Ancient History, Macquarie University. Yeah, Macquarie University. Where is that?
In Sydney.
Oh, lovely. He's committed to delivering creative, engaging content grounded in careful thought. Do you think carefully?
I try to. Don't always.
I don't know.
Especially in podcasts.
Yeah, I don't know if you're going to work out on this show.
John's first book appeared in 1993. That's when I made the first VeggieTales episode.
I was inspired by you.
No, because you wouldn't have seen it yet. It wasn't in Australia.
I was making it up.
Yeah, much later.
I wasn't thinking carefully.
And has since produced a dozen titles, including the award-winning A Spectator's Guide to World Religions and the recent Investigating Jesus. He's the founder of the Center for Public Christianity, a senior minister at St. Andrew's Roseville Church. Is there something else on the St. Andrew's Roseville
Church?
Okay. And an honorary fellow in the Department of Ancient History at Macquarie.
So what focus of ancient history?
So my PhD was exploring how ancient philosophies and religions in the period sort of 300 BC to AD 300 tried to promote their views. Was there proselytizing going on in the Roman Empire amongst the religions? And then a focused study on Christianity in that context.
Okay.
And ended up concluding that only Judaism and Christianity had real interest in seeing non-Jews, non-Christians join the family.
And
something like that.
Why do you think that was? Did you draw conclusions?
Yeah, I think it comes from the belief that there's one God, who rather likes everybody.
Right. So if
the average person worshipping a god, Asclepius, the healing god in Corinth, doesn't really care that there are Egyptians who don't know about Asclepius, because they'll have their own something or other. Who cares? But if you thought there was a God who loved everyone in the world, It changes everything. And so, although there's not much evidence of Jewish missionary activity pre-Christianity, there is a little bit. And they're kicked out of Rome on 2 occasions for converting too many people to Judaism.
Whoa.
So there's a little bit.
Aphrodite was getting angry?
Yeah, the Roman emperors. But Christianity comes out of that Jewish context, has the same view that God likes everyone, but has a kind of explosive reason to get out there because Jesus said so.
That's really interesting. So a universal God has more implication for your neighbors than the God of your tribe.
But the rub is also with Judaism, Christianity, it's the exclusivity of the message that ends up disrupting things. So like in India, Hinduism's like, yeah, sure, worship whatever you want, and everyone gets along, and there's no problem.
And here comes the Christian.
Here comes the Christian. And they're fine with that too, as long as you don't push the exclusivity piece, and then it becomes a problem.
Right. Okay, first question. How did you go from rocker to theologian historian? And was it because you thought you would get more girls?
That's because I found my girl on the road.
Oh, you were done.
Yeah, so I was
you were done. Mission accomplished.
Mission accomplished.
Time to put away the spandex
The point
and cut
of
the
my
hair.
singing career had arrived. Actually, my wife didn't like my music at all, and I found that really intriguing.
That's awkward.
Here's this gorgeous girl that I met at a concert, and she was so
one in the back booing.
not interested.
Boo.
And
So why was she there?
I don't know.
She was dating the drummer at the time.
Her girlfriends dragged her.
And anyway, I got her address and wrote to her and won her over with words. How about that?
Wow.
Wasn't my singing voice, just words. But we were Christians in this band.
Yeah.
And although we were playing in pubs and clubs and universities and schools like other bands, we were also playing in environments where we could also share our faith. And 3-minute song introductions became 15-minute song introductions. And it was such a thing that people wrote to us thousands of letters asking more about the Christian faith.
Wow.
To the point where we had to take a day off. The band members took a day off a week. We were full-time. Day off a week just to reply mail. And almost all of it, apart from the mail that went to the good-looking guitarist, was about Christianity.
Is that you?
Yeah, no. No.
Okay.
Ben.
Okay, I wasn't sure.
He was the cute one. Every band has one.
Yeah. So we would reply people's mail. They'd be asking us, this question about Christianity or that. And that became such a big part of what we did that people would invite us to speak at things. And the speaking and the writing took over the music, which may, reflect on people's view of the music, right? But it also dawned on me that
you try
here
to
I
put
was.
out an album of your speaking?
No, there's an idea.
Yeah.
It dawned on me that here I had this platform, incredible, singing and speaking to many people, but I knew almost nothing about the Bible and theology and church history and philosophy and
You
stuff.
would have done great in the United States.
Yeah, that's when you start a megachurch.
Well, it scared me because they sometimes hooked our band up with travelling evangelists, and we would spend like 2 weeks being the candy, and then people would come, and then the evangelists would go get them. And we, I don't mean to be disrespectful, but some of these evangelists were so shallow. They were telling the same funny stories, same punchlines, night after night after night. And I guess in a sense we were playing the same songs, but it just made me think, am I going to be a shallow, impressive, but shallow musician evangelist? And it scared me. We disbanded, and 3 of the band did a degree in theology, half thinking we might get the band back together.
Right.
But once you've done a degree in theology,
And write
it's hard to
songs
do.
that no one will be able to follow.
Yeah, in Greek.
This set is in Aramaic.
But I got so into the nerdiness of theology that after that's when I did my doctoral studies in history in a secular university.
So how old were you when you moved from music to semi-full-time student?
26.
Okay. Cool. And when did you start the Center for Public Christianity?
About 7 years ago.
Okay.
All right, talk about that. How did that emerge?
What is a Center for Public Christianity? And is there also a Center for Private Christianity in Australia?
That's kind of the point. What we want to be doing is bringing Christianity out where it always was. Jesus was out in public. And so there's something inherently public about Christianity. We want a centre that engages the public square, which is mainly the media, but also major debates and so on, with sensible, classical, generous Christianity.
And you don't like the term apologetics.
Well, I know you have to be careful.
He has to be careful. He's at an apologetics conference here at the moment, but you don't use the term apologetics
at the Centre for Public Christianity for a couple of reasons. One is I think it's a damaged term, at least in Australia. You will hear people say, oh, that's just apologetics, by which they mean you're just using any argument you can find lying on the ground to commend Christ. You're not really doing scholarship.
Okay.
And at the centre, we're basically a bunch of scholar communicators, people who have done their doctoral work but actually prefer engaging people humanly. So we just want to be doing public Christianity, best of scholarship through the best of media. And we write for the major newspapers, we talk on the radio stations about Christianity.
But you do engage the classic topics that an apologist would engage. You engage science, you engage atheism.
We absolutely do. Historical Jesus, environmentalism, everything. Okay. But what we're trying to show is the truth and beauty of Christianity as a worldview on any question you could put to the faith.
And it seems to be working.
I think so. I mean, our website is a treasure trove of video, audio, articles that is all directed at the person who doesn't believe.
Right.
So there's nothing on our site that looks like apologetics in the sense that, here are the 9 ways to help your non-Christian friend know Christ. It's all for the non-Christian public.
Okay.
So,
and the website, if you're looking for it, is publicchristianity.com. Right? Oh, .org. Sorry. Publicchristianity.org.
So the website does one thing, but then we're also writing for the newspapers and so on. And over the 7 years that we've been around, it just seems like the news services have got a taste for classical, generous, thoughtful Christianity. And although when we started out, we thought, the sceptical, liberal, biased media, they're not really going to want it, but we're going to go in there. We've actually changed our minds on this. We decided to have a kind of front-footed, generous approach to the media, not always think they're out to get us. And we have been stunned at the opportunities we've had in serious left-leaning media to talk about very open Christianity because they actually want a more nuanced conversation. They know sometimes they want the crazy, and so they'll invite the crazy, or they want the denominational leader, like the Archbishop of this or the, whatever. But if they're wanting sort of just Christianity, they call us.
So they don't think of you guys as having a specific denominational affiliation?
And nor do we. I mean, I attend, a particular church, so do the other guys. But no, in fact, our only creedal statement is the Nicene Creed, which every denomination can sign up to.
Right. So does that ever cause problems, not with the secular media, but within the Christian world, because they feel like, oh, well, you're not representing this right, or you're not representing our particular view of things? And I've experienced that working for a trans-denominational, not transgender, but trans-denominational organization where everyone wants us to take a stand on their particular theology or cultural issue. Does that come up?
It does a little bit, but we tend to say to media when they engage us, there's a variety of views on that, and quite happily say there's X, Y, and Z. If you want my view as a director...
I know. I love it.
Yeah.
Sorry.
X, Y, and Z, right.
Koala.
And I came here on a flying kangaroo, by the way. That's how all Australians...
Qantas, really?
Qantas, yeah. Flying kangaroo, that's what we call Qantas.
I almost got in a fight on a Qantas flight once.
With a kangaroo?
No, but he was an Aussie. Drank way too much.
Oh.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Foster's?
Sorry about that.
And smoked. This was back when they smoked.
He wasn't drinking Foster's, I can assure you.
So who drinks Foster's?
No one. It's what we send to America.
Okay. Okay. And we fall for it. We fall for it. We're such fools. How much time do you spend in the U.S.? How often do you get over here?
It varies, but 2 to 5 times a year. So I think next year I'm here 5 times.
Okay. So how do you see? Because what we talk about a lot is kind of the shifting sands in the culture, and how even in that story at Trinity Western University, where you would have assumed 150 years ago that you couldn't be a good lawyer if you didn't have a biblical view of the world. Now they're assuming the opposite. You can't be a good lawyer if you do have a historical biblical view. How does what's happening here compare with Australia in terms of cultural shift? Is it similar?
It's very similar. Australians are just a little more used to it, I think. So used to the secularization process.
Okay.
So there's a little more alarm in America, it seems to me.
Somewhere between the States and England?
We are far more like the UK and Europe than we are like America.
So you're not freaking out at the changes anymore?
Look, some are.
But yet you're giving us the Newsboys and Rebecca St. James and the Wiggles. They're not Christian. I mean, they're because there's more. If you go to a Christian booksellers convention in the U.S., there are more Aussies than there are Brits. There are more Aussies in Christian music than there are Brits in Christian music. So I've kind of gotten the impression that there's more of a Bible Belt, effectively in Australia than there is in England.
It's a Bible Belt, but it's really low. It's like the Bible bottom, under.
Yes and no.
It's Bible garter.
It's got to go around our Aussie thighs, right? Yes and no. Look, Australia's a place of contradiction. So we were started as a penal colony, which always makes people a bit nervous. And Christianity was such a small part of our beginnings, unlike America, where there was very much spiritual hope in those Puritans.
To start a church, not a nation.
And yet, paradoxically, there remains very high belief rates in a creator and very high belief rates in Jesus. So a study was done recently that found, I don't think I have the exact figures to hand, but it's something like 62% of Australians think miracles are in principle possible. 67% of Australians think Jesus did miracles. Doesn't that mess with your head? More people think Jesus did miracles than think miracles are possible.
Well, it's because they're not possible anymore.
No, but it was just an in principle, right? But I think the reason is these questions weren't one after another. They were elsewhere in the survey, right? But I think Australians go, I'm not so sure about the church and all that, but Jesus...
He's a good bloke.
Jesus is a good bloke, but there is a real affection for Jesus that you will still find. You will still find many Australians who have a high view of Jesus, and what we're trying to do at the Centre for Public Christianity is represent that guy, not so much the church.
So, okay, that brings up then for the Centre for Public Christianity and just the ethos of Christianity in Australia. In the United States over the last 30, 40 years, particularly evangelicalism has become so associated with a certain political point of view. Is that true in Australia?
Not nearly to the degree.
Because I feel like that's a lot of what we're fighting is all the political baggage that's now associated with our faith.
It's incredibly damaging, I think. We see it in Australia, and sometimes journalists have come to us to say, is what's happening here in Australia the same as what's happening in America? And sometimes they write the Australian story based on the American story, but it's not really a true story in Australia. Slightly more Christians are conservative voters, but there are an awful lot of non-conservatives that are Orthodox evangelical Christians.
See, for a lot of our audience, they're going to hear that and go, that's not possible. You can't not be a conservative politically and be a Christian.
Yeah, I hear that, but that's just how it is in Australia.
What are you speaking on this week at the Ravi Zacharias conference? What's your topic?
Believe it or not, I asked if I could come and teach the Bible.
Interesting.
Instead of address, I've done this conference many years, and I've sort of wheeled out my science talks and historical Jesus, which is more my specialty. I've done that in the past. So I asked if I could expound the 10 Commandments. How to kill a conversation. The 10 Commandments.
Are they not aware
they're
of
selling
them?
tickets to this, right?
And so over 5 days, I've been unpacking the commandments. But what I've been trying to do is show how they're refracted in Jesus. In fact, I've worn my Pink Floyd T-shirt in order to illustrate, I'm not sure if we can see this, the refraction Think of the Old Testament law as the light that passes through the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus.
Okay.
And refracts into its true spectrum.
Do you see in this one moment, we have your whole story. We have the rocker and the
theologian.
all there.
Why not?
Which Pink Floyd song do you think best reflects the life of Jesus?
Uh-oh.
I wish you were here.
Okay.
Okay, so can you give one example of one of the commandments and how that gets refracted in the life of Jesus?
Sure. Well, we're all quite used to the idea of food laws being refracted because Jesus said all food is clean. But we can still read that Old Testament law and hear God's voice in it to make the distinction between the clean and the unclean is just a basic principle of life, right? Even though we don't sit under that specific law. Sometimes refraction is intensification. So the don't create idols command, number 2, in the New Testament, still don't create idols, becomes greed. Twice the Apostle Paul says greed is idolatry because it's revering created stuff instead of the creator, which is pretty much like creating an idol. So there's an intensification. Then I think the Sabbath is an interesting example of refraction in the sense of being transformed beyond recognition, not contradicted. But Paul is quite clear in Romans 14 and in Colossians 2 that Christians aren't to judge one another on whether they keep a Sabbath, which is fascinating because the Sabbath command is there.
Right.
And why is this? Because in the New Testament idea, the Sabbath was always a sign of being delivered from slavery into rest of God's salvation. And so the Sabbath command in Deuteronomy says, I rescued you out of Egypt, therefore keep the Sabbath holy. So the Sabbath, already in the commandment, you can see it's meant to be a sign of rest. And a weekly cycle of that, yes, but in the new covenant, that rest is seen as our resting in Christ's forgiveness, the rest that we will enter into in eternity. And it's still God's wisdom to actually rest, but we're not to judge one another by not keeping the commandment in its unrefracted form. We obey it in its refracted form.
So what do you do with contemporary theologians, more progressive theologians, who say, well, we need to refract the commandments of the New Testament now to better understand God's intent for today, so they'll take things like marriage or sexuality, or you can go on down the list of New Testament ideas and say, well, that was fine then, but we need to refract them further and apply them to our day, to a more progressive hermeneutic, in other words.
I would just say that's to miss the whole point of the New Testament, because what is it that refracts? It's the prism, right? The prism refracts light. What prism have you got in your liberal theological agenda? The only prism that the whole Bible gives us is Jesus Christ.
And so the response to, I'm playing devil's advocate here.
Sure. You do it so well.
Thank you.
It's the bald thing.
We still have the Holy Spirit. And the Holy Spirit is continuing to refract the
Holy
revelation
Spirit
of Scripture.
Provides endless prisms.
Sure, but he was sent by Christ, and so he can only ever point back to Christ. And so you're without any authority to change the things of the New Testament. And the great thing is, the Old Testament itself said it would one day be refracted. So Moses said, I'm going to go, and another Moses, a prophet like me, will come.
Who's greater than I am.
And you have to listen to him. But then the last line of Deuteronomy is, ever since that day, there's never been a prophet like Moses. Aha. So this is a deliberate saying, we've got to wait for the prophet like Moses. So there's this tension set up. Then, of course, Jeremiah 31 says, I'll give a new covenant. It will not be like the old covenant. I will write my law in their hearts. I will forgive their sins. Jesus takes the bread and the wine and it says, this is the new covenant in my blood. So he has set this whole prism thing up. This is not us picking and choosing. Our secular friends like to say, oh, you just pick and choose. You don't like that command. You do like that command. It's rubbish. You've got to pay attention to how Christians have always read the Old and New Testament as two covenants refracted through Jesus. Well, how did we get onto that?
I totally agree. I think it's a great answer.
But the way I like to,
all the way.
I like to say, instead of refraction, Jesus makes the light prettier. Do you like that? Look, it's prettier.
It's a rainbow, man. I'm suspicious now.
Yeah. Oh, there's a thing you guys have.
Yeah,
right?
I know. You can step in it in so many different ways over here.
I'm going to take my kangaroo home now.
What is it? Oh, yeah, you flew the kangaroo. Yeah, but kangaroos don't fly.
They jump really high.
What's unique to Australia that flies? There's certain bats.
They have flying squirrels.
Flying squirrel. Gliding squirrels.
No. We have all
kiwis
sorts
don't
of
fly.
bats.
Yes.
We have lots of stuff
Kiwis don't
attacked
fly.
that doesn't
by bats.
fly, like emus,
Yeah.
right? Because Australia, it's such a great place, peace everywhere, relaxation. Birds just gave up flying. That's basically it.
Right.
We've got the beach. Why do you need to fly?
Right.
Yeah,
Sharks.
it's only well, they're water animals, right? It's only in countries where there's lots of stuff, that
Right.
you need to fly away from.
Okay.
That people keep flying.
So another topic, as you engage a lot on science. Australia is the birthplace of Ken Ham.
Therefore,
How big of a young Earth movement is there in Australia, and how do you engage? How do you kind of parse those waters? Because we bump into that a ton here.
I get into trouble a bit.
Okay.
For
Not just for your choices of T-shirts.
for not.
metaphors.
Look, I am friends with lots of six-day creationists. I'm not a six-day creationist. I think the science is pretty clear, but more important for me, Genesis looks like it was not written to be read concretely. Its literary style looks like it's inviting a more literary approach to its themes. But, I think you can be a faithful, believing Christian six-dayer and a faithful, believing...
So the Center for Public Christianity, does the center take a position?
The problem is when we get real professors in the studio, and we don't go for Christian apologists. We go for top-tier professors.
Okay.
We haven't yet found one who doesn't think that the world is millions of years old.
Okay.
So
if we had a top professor from Cambridge University in the UK and who was in town, was a Christian, and could make the case that six-day creationism is right, we would, of course, interview them.
so obviously six-day creationism is not part of the Nicene Creed.
It's not.
So it's not part of what you're going to defend.
No.
And
Nor is it a big part of Australia, Australian
I think
Christianity.
that's what Phil's getting at is how,
Yeah.
how much is this a part, because it is an ongoing issue in American Christianity,
Yes,
but
it comes
seems
up
to be a non-issue in other parts of the world.
It's a non-issue. Well, I won't call it a non-issue. There are still many, devout six-day creationists, but I wouldn't say it's a majority in Australia. I would say the majority of Christians are just very comfortable, have never thought you had to take those early chapters in a literalistic fashion.
Which maybe is why Ken Ham is in the United States, because there's more fertile ground here
It's
for
a
his views.
Bigger market.
Yeah.
I suppose. Yeah, that's why Justin Bieber came down from Canada. Bigger market.
That's why the Beatles came from England. The British invasion.
They didn't stay. They were just visiting, I think.
but
I
still.
read your story, the top 10 tips for atheists this Easter. That was fun.
Okay, thanks.
That was a fun piece.
So what are they? Let's hear some.
Tip number one.
And context is this is for a major news service, secular news service.
Yes.
And as
So
a
you
result
get a little,
of this,
you get a little cheeky with your stuff. Then.
I did.
Well,
I
basically-
stepped over the cheek monitor here.
The premise is atheists should drop their easily dismissed scientific, philosophical, or historical arguments against Christianity and instead quiz believers about Old Testament violence and hell, writes John Dixon. Who is this John? Oh, that's you. Right. And that's interesting because you're offending in multiple ways.
I know.
You're saying none of your current arguments are any good. And then you're saying, if you really want to make us uncomfortable, ask about this.
I know.
Which makes Christians go, yeah.
It seemed like a good idea at the time, and it certainly got a lot of hits and so on. But look, I'm not really attacking atheism per se there. I'm just saying the new atheism is so lightweight. It really is. And there are heavyweight atheists, and our new atheist friends need to listen to them because to people who are informed in philosophy and history and the sciences, new atheists just sound silly. So when Richard Dawkins says a serious historical case can be made that Jesus never lived at all, as has been made by G.A. Wells of London University, it sounds good, but everyone knows G.A. Wells is Professor of German Language.
I didn't know that.
Everyone who knows historical Jesus,
When
and he
I
wrote a
took
popular
classes
book.
from him, he was teaching.
He wrote a
on
popular
something
book.
else.
He's a German professor. It's just, you wouldn't find a professor of ancient history or classics in any major university in the world who thinks Jesus didn't live. So let's drop that one. This whole business of faith being believing things against evidence, let's drop that. No theologian in the history of Christian thought has thought faith is believing things without evidence. So I just want us to get on the same page.
So new atheism is sort of like new Coke. It's just really unnecessary.
A failed experiment.
The old Coke was just fine. So we need classic atheism.
We need classic atheism. I think we do.
Yeah.
And I think
But
one
new
thing...
atheism is so much more popular, and because it's aggressive. It's like an episode of South Park. It's just like, wham, we're going to punch you right in the nose and kick you.
It's atheism for the Twitter generation.
But it's overreaching.
Yeah.
And
do you see it?
And it's going to collapse under its own weight.
Losing its movement. I read
really
somewhere
do.
that someone commenting that Richard Dawkins was now coming up more as a joke in conversation than as an inspiration. Even in some atheist circles, that he's almost a cartoon of himself.
He's jumped the shark?
Very possibly, yeah. That probably means something else in Australia.
I have no idea what that means.
Yeah, it's a Happy Days reference.
Remember Happy Days?
I do.
The TV show?
The Fonz.
Yeah, there was an episode where the Fonz jumped over a shark
he was water
with a
skiing.
motorcycle.
No, he was
Yeah.
on water skis.
It was when Jaws was really popular.
He jumped a shark.
He jumped over the shark with water skis.
Yeah.
And everyone thinks that's after that episode is when the show really started to decline.
Yeah, that episode was the beginning of the end.
Right.
Yeah.
So jumping the shark.
So it's becoming a cartoon of yourself.
I like it.
Yeah, it's
like
when
it.
you've reached your apex and now you're on the way down.
Well, I think that probably is new atheism. And you can already see some atheist writers really pulling back, distancing themselves from Dawkins and Hitchens and Sam Harris and so on, and trying to have a more nuanced conversation.
And do you bump into a lot of, because if you post an article like that and then go down and read the comments.
Which I no longer do.
Yeah, that's a mess when you do that. There's still a lot of popular level just regurgitating of sound bites from various, whether it's Bill Maher on HBO or, Richard Dawkins said something to Jon Stewart, and it all comes back in sound bites. What do you do with that? Do you simply just ignore it? Because my concern is that's where a younger generation is getting most of what they believe to be knowledge. I heard this soundbite, I read this tweet, and so now I know that, for example, Jesus never existed because this German guy said so.
All the more reason for Christians to be in the public square, doing public Christianity. Christianity Today should be pitching articles to the New York Times, get the best writers. Our top professors who are Christians should be putting themselves forward for comment, because that's how you get the people out there hearing the more nuanced stuff.
Right.
And I've come to believe that the hundreds of comments that follow an article like that, that's not really where the action is. It's the lurker who won't comment, who's a lot more reasonable, who's just looking for something sensible, maybe a little bit sparky, coming from a new angle, and I'm writing for them.
Okay.
I know I'm going to get hammered, and I'm happy to take hits, but they're not the majority. The majority are just looking on going, actually, that's not a bad idea. And hopefully that's something God can take and do something beautiful with.
So you're obviously very well established in the Australian church, and you come to the United States regularly. You probably have a feel for things over here. What do you think the American church can learn from what's happened in Australia? Or what can we transfer to our context that would be beneficial?
Nothing.
Really?
Oh, come on.
What right do I have to offer comment on that?
I didn't say you have a right. I'm just inviting it.
I will just say this.
Or what should we
You don't
not
have
do?
to be so scared. How about that? You don't have to be so scared. Sometimes you can lose political force, legislative force, and not lose gospel force. And with my historian's cap on, I'm forever impressed that the early Christians did what they did in bringing the gospel to the Roman world without any legislation or power or anything. And this truly baffles classicists. One of our leading ancient historians, a professor in Australia, Edwin Judge, would describe this as almost miraculous, what the early Christians did in converting an empire without any power. And so from the Australian perspective, I'd just say, in the kind of pre-post-Christendom in which we find ourselves, not quite post-Christendom, not quite Christendom, pre-post Christendom, it can be scary, but I think you can relax because the gospel can still go forward very powerfully without the kind of sociological measures that we seem to be fixated on.
That's a topic we've talked about quite a bit on this podcast.
Yeah.
Is how to be a faithful Christian in our rapidly changing culture without being afraid.
And it tends to go much better.
It does.
If someone wanted to read just one of your books, which one would you recommend for a more casual, for a podcast listener? Which is your most popular book? Which is your most accessible? Do you remember any of your books?
They're on my website.
I heard you speak on your book on humility. What?
I'm so embarrassed that I wrote a book on humility.
Why?
Because then I get introduced as, and this is the guy who wrote the book on humility.
Yeah, well,
And he said it was
you
the
make
best
a joke
book on humility ever.
Oh, man.
And then you make a joke about it.
Yeah.
What else
Yeah,
did you do?
it was a very misguided project.
Okay, scratch that one.
Don't read that
the
book.
book on humility.
Yeah.
What about the comparative religion book? What's that
It's
one
not
called?
bad.
It's not. Well, I'm not telling you to rate them.
A Spectator's Guide to World Religions, sure. But my historical Jesus books are also there.
Okay.
People can find out for themselves.
JohnDickson.com? .org?
JohnDickson.org.
JohnDickson.org, because you're an organization.
AU?
Yeah.
No AU?
I'm not a
No,
com.
there's no AU.
No AU.
No AU. I got it here somewhere. Let's go to all his websites. JohnDickson.com, public.org, JohnDickson.org, publicchristianity.org, standrews.net.au.
Just to mess with your head.
Check out his church. And you can look him up at Macquarie University. Is it in a quarry?
Nope.
That would be really cool.
Sydney is one of the coolest cities I've ever been to.
Yeah.
What a
I've
beautiful
never been
city.
there. But it's too far away. Could you bring it closer?
It's not.
We like it just where it is.
Okay. Now I have to sum up what we just talked about with a song, which usually goes horribly. Because I'm not a former rock star like you are.
You should hand over the strings.
I'm a tomato. Can you play ukulele?
No.
You're just saying that, like you're saying you can't remember any of your books.
The guy who wrote the book on humility is practicing a little.
Hey, is the church rent asunder? When you go check it out down under, are things changing there like they're changing here? If you came to America on a kangaroo, it's so easy to step in a bunch of political poo. 'Cause we're a little more paranoid than our Aussie friends. So take a tip from John and don't be so paranoid and freaked out and scared of everything, because it doesn't help anybody, and try to write articles for major daily newspapers, because it's better than just talking to ourselves.
Oh, man.
Thank you.
I apologize on behalf of the
Thank
Northern
you.
Hemisphere.
I like it. That's
You do the best you
great.
can with what God has given you,
Yeah,
which may or may not be much. Yeah. How long are you here?
Fly out tomorrow.
Okay. Well, cool. Well, thanks for stopping by.
Great fun.
John Dixon, JohnDickson.org.